everybody, and welcome. Welcome to the Minnesota History Center. I'm Steve Elliott. I'm the director and CEO of the Minnesota Historical Society, and we are delighted to co-host this celebratory occasion with you. I'm particularly pleased that you came home to the Forest History Society's birthplace, the Minnesota Historical Society, to celebrate your 70th anniversary. It was about 71 years ago, September, that Judge Kenneth Brill, president of the Minnesota Historical Society, Theodore Blegan, dean of the graduate school at the University of Minnesota, and August Cray, chairman of the university's Department of History, along with our acting superintendent, Louis Beeson, they made a visit to the home of F.E. Weyerhaeuser. Their purpose was to discuss the upcoming 100th anniversary of the Minnesota Territory, which also marked the 100th anniversary of the Minnesota Historical Society. Interesting footnote: the Historical Society was chartered in one of the first acts of the first territorial legislature. They talked about how best to mark the centennial, of course, but at some point, the conversation turned to trees, to forestry, one of our state's great industries, and then a discussion ensued concerning the need for a repository for the records for this important lifeline of Minnesota's economy and for its people. So you must understand that the people meeting with F.E. were highly regarded historians. Blegan was a giant in the field of regional and local history. Building named for him at the University of Minnesota. He wrote about immigration history in the upper Midwest, and Cray, while chairing the history department, was also leading the American Historical Review. Okay, now this may not sound like a lot to you all, but this is big deal in the field. The American Historical Review and the Council on American History. Judge Brill served on the Ramsey County District Court, but he was president of the Minnesota Society of District Court Justices. And Louis Beeson, he headed the Minnesota Historical Society's Field Services program that extended the resources and expertise of the Society across the state, as he literally helped to organize county and local historical societies that now number in the hundreds to tell their story and become partners with us. Here they are, the giants of history in the region: Blegan, Brill, Cray, Beeson, with F.E. Visionaries who understood the importance of preserving the forest industry's history and heritage before it was too late. The Forest History Society came into being a year later thanks to F.E.'s nephew, the beloved Frederick King Weyerhaeuser, F.K., of course. I think one of the most interesting projects during our close collaboration in those years was the nearly 70 oral history interviews that captured the voices and experiences of people such as Birgit Anderson of Big Fork, Maybelle Hick Hansen of Little Fork, Carl Bruno of Cloquet, Marion Brown of Grand Rapids, Ida Christensen of Hill City, Clyde Jellison of Cohasset, Bill Riola of Effie. The interviews captured the recollections of thousands of men and women through their stories, born in the 19th century, who homesteaded, came north to work in the lumber industry, and while some came from Europe and others from around the Midwest, their stories have a consistent message of community, hard work, and the nature surrounding them and the forests of northern Minnesota. That the Weyerhaeusers should be so instrumental and so generous in founding the Forest History Society will not be a surprise to anyone who knows the family name. Generation upon generation of the family, founded by Frederick and Sarah, have made a tremendous impact in the lives of innumerable people across the country. Their sons and daughters It's important to remember names: John Philip, Elise, Margaret, Apollonia, Charles, Rudolph, and Frederick passed on to 7 generations the importance of contributing to their communities and to the quality of life wherever they live. We here at the Minnesota Historical Society are especially grateful, Lucy, for your leadership and your distinguished service on our board of directors and beyond over the years. Because of your extraordinary commitment to Minnesota's history, you've been elected beyond your service on the board to the Emerita and Honorary Council. I hope you all realize Lucy is a very dear friend to the Minnesota Historical Society. Thank you. So let me just give you the thumbnail speech about us. Nonprofit educational and cultural institution established in 1849. We collect, preserve, and tell the stories of Minnesota's past through exhibits, libraries, collections, 26 historic sites, educational programming, publishing. Our mission is to use the power of history to transform lives. We preserve our past, share our state stories, and connect people with that history. The Forest History Society is a part of our story, and we extend our heartiest congratulations to the Forest History Society from the 27,000 members of the Minnesota Historical Society. We look forward to the many anniversary celebrations there are to come. Welcome. Thanks for being here tonight.
North Carolina's most famous writer, Thomas Wolfe, wrote, "You can never go home again." And he may have been existentially correct, but tonight we are happy to be home where the Forest History Society began. I'd like to thank Stephen Elliott, Karen Humphrey, Dwayne Swanson, Charlie Rogers, Shelby Edwards, and others from the Minnesota Historical Society who have given us such a warm welcome and shared our enthusiasm for our 70th anniversary. It is most appreciated. Thank you. Yesterday evening, we were treated to a very special reception at the former Driscoll Weyerhaeuser home at 266 Summit Avenue. Now, to be in the house where Frederick Weyerhaeuser and family lived and have a special presentation by Judy Healy, author of the recent biography of Frederick, I have to admit, gave me a few goosebumps. A special thanks to Tom and Susan Handley for opening their home for this special occasion. It is wonderful to meet new friends. And we wouldn't have had yesterday evening or tonight if it wasn't for the efforts of Lucy Jones. Lucy has been a member of the Forest History Society since 1980, was elected to the FHS board in 2004 and served 2 terms. And one of the marks of a really good board member is how much they're involved after their terms end. And she was on a steering committee for a major endowment campaign, was instrumental in helping to establish the Walter S. Rosenberry Fellowship in Forest and Conservation History that supports the work each year of a graduate student in North America. And for these reasons and others, Lucy was recently, this is a surprise, Lucy, you were elected Fellow of the Forest History Society for many years of outstanding and sustained leadership. I have to say, this is, the Fellow Award is our highest honor for the Forest History Society. And Lucy, I have a little token of esteem. If you'd come up here. Thank you. Well, now that we've given our current board something to aspire to, I'd like to recognize them. They are among the top in their respective fields, including history, finance, silviculture, forest products, and conservation forestry. They volunteer their leadership throughout the year, including weekends for board meetings like tomorrow. So there should be at least one board member at every table, and I would ask if the FHS board and former board members would please stand up, and let's give them a round of applause. So for me, it's very good to see so many friends here tonight. The FHS has many cherished Weyerhaeuser family friends because it began here in St. Paul 70 years ago. But our support now comes from many different circles. With over 800 supporting members, it's a bond shared by foresters, historians, authors, tree lovers, history buffs, and those whose families were involved in past timbering and sawmilling. Through our members, we are allied with 250 companies and organizations, over 400 colleges and universities, and 27 countries. So I'd like to take the opportunity to just recognize, it'd be impossible for me to recognize everyone, but I'd like to make a couple of recognitions here. If Alvin Huss was here, he'd be very pleased to know that his work lives on at the Forest History Society. His support for our preservation function is what put our archives on the map. And his son, John, and daughter-in-law, Ruth, then helped to put that map in the hands of everyone with a computer. So the Huss family is synonymous with civic and cultural support, and I'm proud to say of forest history support as well. And please help me recognize John and Ruth for all of you've done for the Forest History Society. Also, here this evening is Harry Camp. He's been a supporting member of the Forest History Society for 50 years. And he's worked for 47 years for the U.S. Forest Service before he retired. So now retired, Harry and his wife, Myrna, live in St. Paul. They have 8 children, 15 grandchildren, and 17 great-grands. Those of you who live in St. Paul may recognize Harry if you saw the cover of the St. Paul Pioneer Press last month, which featured the story of Harry's 106th birthday party, a grand affair drawing 175 friends, and we are honored to be among his many friends. Ladies and gentlemen, please help me welcome Mr. and Mrs. Harry Camp. In a few short weeks, I'll be marking 20 years as president of the Forest History Society. And until recently, we had 3 people who were there longer than I have been. We have been blessed with very little turnover. But now 3 of the 9 FHS employees are under 30, and it's a whole new world of social media, crowdsourcing, virtual reality. But over 70 years, our growth and success has been fueled by the inquisitive young minds and minds of all ages interested in history. And that's why we are planning to build a facility of the future for the Forest History Society. Our board chair, Chris Zinkhan, will share a few details of this initiative later on. And after dinner, I invite you to look at the easels that are around by the stairs that show a mock-up of our proposed design for this future. Now we have several new initiatives at FHS. I'm not going to go through them all, but one that deserves some special attention. And this is our new documentary film called America's First Forest, Carl Schenck and the Asheville Experiment. And I know that to some it may sound like a jazz group. But Carl Schenck was a German forester who started the first forestry school in the U.S. on the Biltmore Estate in North Carolina. And we used this as a backdrop to talk about the early roots of forest conservation and sustainability in America. It was based on Carl Schenck's memoirs, the original of which is housed at the Forest History Society's Alvin J. Huss archives. The title was selected for PBS. We had a different title before. Indeed, during April and May of this year, around Earth Day and Arbor Day, the film was broadcast on public television stations throughout the U.S. over 1,200 times by 346 stations and the World Channel in 43 states. And it was estimated to be seen by over 2 million people nationwide. And I think that's commendable for a small nonprofit to achieve this kind of reach. And this is a great example of how the Forest History Society stewards its resources for the public good. And we have a free DVD copy for each of you over by the stairs as you leave tonight. So please pick one up. By the way, it has 2 films on there. One is the 1-hour documentary, and the second is a short version that is being shown at the Visitor Center at the Cradle of Forestry on the Pisgah National Forest, where that site now resides. So, right now it's my honor to introduce our guest speaker. Char Miller is one of the leading environmental historians in America today. He is the W.M. Keck Professor of Environmental Analysis at Pomona College in California. He just finished his 12th book, one of which was published by the Forest History Society, and has created countless other anthologies. He has been to the Society's headquarters to conduct research several times. Char is a supporting member of the Society for 30 years now, 11 of which he served on our board. And so if anyone really knows us, it might be Char Miller. He was also a featured interviewee on that documentary film, America's First Forest. And in 2014, he was elected Fellow of the Forest History Society. Ladies and gentlemen, please help me welcome my good friend, Char Miller.
Thank you so much. But I'll lean around the corner as I can. I want to start tonight talking about why places like the Minnesota Historical Society and the Forest History Society matter so deeply to me, in part because I grew up in libraries. My mother was a librarian, and so books were a matter of course. We just would toddle out of the house and into the car and into a library and pull all these things back with us. And it occurred to me that one of the things I was thinking about was the very first time I went to the Forest History Society in the early 1980s, maybe the mid-1980s. And I walked in, I took a breath, and I went, I'm home. It smelled like a library. Maybe a little musty, but nonetheless like a library should, as a place with ideas, but also with these books that contained knowledge that I had no idea about. And the other thing about libraries is the way in which simply by walking through them and pulling something off a shelf, ideas start to perk. It blows my mind how often that happens, that I'm walking down, and it's happened to me so many times at the Forest History Society. I'm walking down, I'm not even looking for the thing that I actually find. And that sort of felicity, the capacity to run into stuff that you don't anticipate, but then suddenly starts to trigger new ideas for you that you didn't know that you should have, leads you off in directions that are really quite astonishing. And so part of that astonishment is working with Jamie Lewis and the others on this new film, because it just led me in different directions, and it led Jamie, who is the senior historian for the Forest History Society, into a whole new field of work that he didn't anticipate. And in fact, today he just arrived for a fellowship in Northern California up near Sea Ranch, where he's going to spend several weeks writing his next screenplay. He had no idea 4 years ago that was going to happen, except that he had this concept that maybe we should tell stories in addition to books and articles in a new way, that the forest history actually could become visual. And I think that's part of what is also really striking about this library, which I consider to be the single best state historical society in the United States. It's true. I've been here 3 or 4 times to work in the archives, to speak in its programs, and it blows my mind every time I walk in here, because California, where I live, does not have a place like this. It has a place that pretends it's like this, but it is not this. And so it is important to know that these institutions, the Forest History Society, the Minnesota Society as well, they don't come from nowhere. Any more than those books come from nowhere. It requires people to think through these issues, which is why I am thrilled to know, one of my great facts for the night, that this organization was founded at the same time the state was founded. What state is already thinking at its birth about its history? Its history is this short. Like, what are they doing, right? And in the same way that it gave genesis to an organization that's now no longer here, but is in North Carolina, but whose roots stretch back to here and also to Santa Cruz, where it was located for a period of time, that what we're looking at is institutions that depend upon human beings and the agency that people embody. We often talk in popular culture today about the ways in which things come at us. Ideas, information, things are moving so fast that we can't comprehend them. I suspect every generation felt the same way. And somehow they managed to build these institutions even though they felt themselves to be overwhelmed. And I would put it to you that part of what we need to do, and I'm keeping this short because I haven't finished my dessert, but part of what we need to do is to remind ourselves of 2 obligations. The present is utterly dependent upon the past. The future is utterly dependent upon the present. And therefore, if we're in this moment, we pivot back and forth in time. That's our job, is to recognize our relationship to those who came before us and start to plan for those who come after us, behind us, whatever the word would be. That's not an obligation we tend to think about a lot. But again, we're sitting in a building that testifies to that, and Joe and others at my table are very much involved in helping to create that. Steve and his incredible work for this organization for 20 years has also done that for the Forest History Society. You are of a time, and then you are out of time. And our obligation and responsibility is cross-generational. We can't simply think about ourselves. We have to push forward. And for an historian, that becomes really crucial. Because for me and for my students, part of what we are working on, and it is a collective project, is to figure out how that past that we're studying actually sticks to us. The way in which it has shaped us, and whether it's environmental history, which is my particular field, social or political, race, whatever it may be, you can't start to think about contemporary problems without immediately jetting back, or at least you should not be thinking about them, without thinking about their origins. But equally so, when you go back, you have to go forward. That is our essential obligation as citizens and human beings. And it seems to me that this moment of celebration is also one of those moments where we look back to the first part of the 70 years ago, so the 1940s, and that letter which is downstairs from the Weyerhaeuser family, donating $16,000 in 3 installments that would ultimately be the reason why we're here. We're here because of that letter. Not bad. For a simple letter, for some kind of money, it produced this place. That's what we do. if we do it right, if we do it with consciousness, and if we do it with intentionality. And it seems to me that part of what this day is to celebrate is the fact that other people had intentions that we now are enveloped by. We live in the world they created. We think ideas that they thought. And part of what we now do, we must do, is start to imagine the world that we're not going to live to see. You're all beautiful faces, but we're all of a certain age. Whatever that lifespan is, it's a span. There's a moment of finality. And so part of what our obligation is to imagine a world that we will not inhabit, that we will have to think about for our kids, for our grandchildren, and those who succeed them. That there are 7 generations of the Weyerhaeusers who've been engaged in this process is pretty impressive. In fact, it's damned impressive. But there'll be an 8th and a 9th and a 10th. And you have to think about that, as we all do for our own families. So what I would suggest to us, if we're going to take sort of a family studies vision, which I'm sort of selling here, is that so are institutions families. They are organic just in the ways that families are. And they have a life that has to be helped and guided and nurtured and mentored. And so tonight, I think, is part of that obligation for all of us, is to help to mentor the Forest History Society, and I would say as a sidebar also for the Minnesota Historical Society, because these two agencies are intertwined and their missions are very similar. So give generously. What can I say? Thank you all very much.
At this time, Char, thank you. You're gonna, I think he went in a little bit, total different direction than he originally intended, or that we discussed. but as usually, totally more effective than whatever we had planned. I'd like to introduce the chair of our board, Chris Zinkhan, who is going to finish up this evening with a few words and tell you a little bit more about our plans for a new home. He is a national and international business leader in forestry, and especially forest finance and conservation. He is president of the Forest Land Group that he manages, one of the most highly respected timber investment management organizations in the world. Please welcome Chris Zinkhan.
Good evening. That's a hard one to follow. Again, I would like to thank you for the warm reception that we've received here in St. Paul over the last couple of days. It's been a wonderful couple of days that we've had. Thanks so much. 70 years is a long time, Steve. Couple of events sort of come to mind to put that in perspective. Just to put that time frame into some perspective. Any Cub fans here tonight? They're playing right now. I think it's 0-0 if you didn't check your phones. You know, the last time the Cubs tasted a World Series was 1945, and by my math, I think that's 71 years. That's in the sports world, that's a long time. In forestry, 70 years might not be so long. I actually grew up in a marginal forest product state, Maryland, and you won't see any Paul Bunyan folklore originate in Maryland, in that particular state. My family had a very modest woodlot there, and I believe my father primarily used it for what I would call behavioral modification for my brother and me, and we deserved it. At that particular time, we cut black locust, firewood, and fence posts. And occasionally, we would have the opportunity to cut some really nice white oak blocks with a 2-man cross-cut saw. We talked about that a little bit today. My brother was about 6 years older than I was and took full advantage of the opportunity. He sort of coasted with that two-man crawl saw, if you know what I mean. So I learned a lot about team building or lack thereof during that period of time. But it was a 68-year-old white oak was the first time that we harvested. It was the first time I actually counted the growth rings of a tree. And this was in 1967. As a 9-year-old, I thought the most fascinating thing I could think of was that we had just harvested a tree that had seen the 19th century. And that was probably the spark, for me at least, that gave me the passion that I have today with respect to forest history. I've spent most of my career trying to buy family forests, primarily from patriarchs. Typically, these are 80-year-old patriarchs around the country. And without a doubt, the most intriguing part of that process is learning the history of these family forests that we have in the United States. And that's part, certainly, of the mission of the Forest History Society. So for me, the fit with the Forest History Society is a natural one. And I think if you talk to my colleagues that are on the board, you'll hear similar types of stories from them in terms of why they do, in fact, serve the Forest History Society. Steve asked me to say a few words about the new building. Here's the timeline. In 2010, the board basically made the new building the top strategic objective of the Forest History Society. By 2014, we had an architect and building plans for that structure. Last year, in 2015, we purchased a real attractive property, 8.6 acres in Duke Forest in Durham as our new site. You've got to see it to believe it. Some real nice topography. I'm a Duke Forestry grad, so this is almost sacred to me, sacred ground to me. 2017, next year, we expect basically the shovels to hit ground. And by 2018, we hope to actually open the doors of the Forest History Society. So we're all excited by that. Why is that noteworthy? Well, during our history, we've never before had the opportunity to design our home from the ground up to basically accommodate the unique collections and work that we do. So this certainly will be unprecedented. As you would expect, the building will feature some real creative uses of wood and wood products that I think folks in the conservation and forestry communities will be quite proud of. So we're looking forward to that. And we thank you for your support on this very important historic achievement of the Forest History Society. With that, on behalf of our hosts and my fellow board members of the Forest History Society, we appreciate you joining us tonight. We appreciate your enthusiasm for the Society, and we look forward to sharing a future where basically we honor the forest heritage and history that we've seen to date for generations to come. Thanks so much.